We're the only country in the world to have a fully privatised water system, and it has failed. No other country has copied us, and there's a good reason for that. Let me share some statistics. First of all, water companies are due to hike our bills over the next 5 years by 36%. Nearly every river in England is polluted through illegal dumping of untreated sewage. Our bathing water quality is the 5th worst in Europe. Over £85 billion has been taken out of water as dividends to shareholders. A similar figure, certainly tens of billions, has also gone to bondholders. Water companies' total debt stands at well over £65 billion. Over 1 trillion litres of water was leaked last year, and this is nothing new. And no major reservoir has been built since privatisation, but 35 reservoirs have been sold. Clearly something needs to be done, and the thing that needs to be done, in my view, is nationalisation.
A lot of the campaigners want nationalisation, and they say that your claim that it would cost £100 billion to renationalise water is untrue, because a lot of these companies like Thames Water is worthless.
Well, I'm afraid £100 billion is accurate. That is not a figure, I've heard the stories as well, that is not a figure that has come from the water companies. That is a figure that I had my officials in the Department of the Environment go and certify
but
for me.
Those officials are claiming Thames Water, for example, is worth about £20 billion. Thames Water.
Now, as far as I can tell, the figure cited, 100 billion or 99 billion to be more accurate, comes from the Social Market Foundation, which is a think tank that was paid by, you've guessed it, the water companies to come up with a figure for what it would cost to nationalise the whole of the water industry in the UK. However, a separate report by Commonwealth has said that the true cost of nationalisation of a company like Thames Water, which is in serious difficulties at the moment, might be closer to zero. And that's because the government does not need to pay market rates when it's nationalising a company. The government can take into account public interest, it can take into account the amount of money that's already been paid to shareholders and to bondholders, and it can take into account the market failures that have occurred in the industry. And when you do take all of those things into account, and when you try and come up with a fair value of what water should be costing the British taxpayer, a figure of £0 seems more appropriate. In fact, if you ask me, I think the water companies should be paying us to take the water companies off their hands, because they haven't invested enough. And actually, nationalising the water industry, whilst it's going to be a good thing, is going to cost the taxpayer quite a lot of money in the future, even though, of course, that's going to be more efficient because the government doesn't need to take a profit.
Yeah, look, the privatisation of water hasn't worked, and it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense on a very basic level. It's a natural monopoly. So Thames Water is my provider. When I'm not happy with a service, I can't change it. So it doesn't work in terms of competition. There is no competition. And then when you look, as we heard there, about levels of profits versus levels of investment, the 1,000+ swimming pool size of water that are lost every day. And it's very difficult to make the case for why it is. And actually, we are the odd ones out. You forget that actually England, you look at Wales, you look at Scotland, you look at Northern Ireland, all of those places run their water for non-profit or as publicly owned.
Fundamentally, the argument for privatisation is that you can have competition between firms that spurs innovation and should reduce prices. Now look, whatever we might happen to think of that argument, it simply doesn't apply in the case of a monopoly provider of a service. There's only one pipe going into my home. It's not possible to have competition in water because you'd have to set up a whole new network of water pipes, and that would obviously be insane. And this applies to lots of other industries too, of course. It applies to rail, it applies to energy. So in these situations when you've got a public monopoly, when there's only one provider, this gives whoever controls the industry a great deal of power to put up prices and to take a great deal of profit. And that's why, of course, you need a regulator. So one of the key problems, of course, with privatisation is that you've got companies extracting profits from the industry, and at the same time, you've got to pay for the cost of a regulator, which often is ineffective because it is too beholden to the views of the companies themselves rather than to the public. How much better would it be if we could nationalise these industries and put workers on the boards as well as customers on the boards of these companies so that we could run the water industry for our own benefit?
I mean, the thing I would say is, of course, you need public ownership. We want to take accountability there, and we want to bring that back into public ownership. But we also want infrastructure investment.
Not 70 billion, 86 billion.
No, and that is a really misleading number, written in a report that was sponsored by the water industry. So
no, it was written in a report by us that wasn't sponsored by anyone. It was also written in a report sponsored by the water industry.
I mean, I think
and no one on the Labour side has disputed that figure.
No, they have actually, and the big misleading thing about this, John McDonnell himself has disputed it, which is that it's actually, when it's a profit-making asset, you can take that asset, you can borrow to invest in that as strategic infrastructure, and then you can pay that back over years because it makes profit. And after 10 years, or 10 years plus when we paid that back, that is then
where do you get that from? Wherever,
ownership.
even if that sum is 86 or 70 or 60 or less, that is a huge amount to pull out now in the middle of whatever we're going through to spend on one project.
It's really important to understand how these narratives work, because this kind of argument comes up all the time. Just look at the comment sections on some of my videos. People are really concerned about public debt, they're really concerned about the deficit, they're really concerned about affordability, because ultimately what they're worried about is that their tax bills are going to go up. But this worry is premised upon only looking at one side of the equation. When we buy an asset, when we invest in our country, we're not just taking on a liability, the debt that we have to get into in order to pay for it if we don't finance it through taxation. We're also creating an asset, and the asset obviously is going to have value in and of itself. But it's also, if you're investing in something like a school or a hospital or water infrastructure, it's also something that's going to generate a return, not necessarily a financial return, but generate a return in terms of value over a number of years. So it's just the wrong way of thinking about it to worry too much about the debt of investing, because investment is a good thing for our society. It creates an asset that has value and it generates a return into the future. So what do you think? Am I right about this? Please let me know in the comments. But for now, goodbye and best wishes.